Hi, everyone, and welcome to another edition of FSOS 3105 Families and Technology. And this time we are in Module 7 on Parent-Child Relationships and Technology. In this section of the course, we started with Section 5, or Module 5, which was on children's development and their use of technology. And we've looked at young children, very young children, and school-aged children and teenagers and emerging adults across the 4 domains of human development: physical development, cognitive, social, and psychological. We've understood how the processes of development are very universal across all ages and stages, and yet for each individual they're very unique, and unique from the standpoint of our expression of our DNA, but especially unique in terms of our context that can encourage and can influence our development. And there are 2 huge factors of our interest along the way with this is for context influence. One is obviously technology and how children are using technology in ways that encourage their development and possibly may stand in the way. And then the second huge context factor are their parents. Their parents as primary caregivers are in very unique, very special roles our society confers on families as being responsible for children's well-being. And so our earlier discussion in Module 5 is very relevant as we move along to today's module on parent-child relationships, because we've begun to give some idea about the really heavy decision-making and information that parents need as they are in the role of supporting their children's development, and especially in this day and age, supporting that development as children are consuming a lot of content online and using screens. So here we are in Module 7. Our last module was then on parents' own use of technology, and there primarily we were looking at how parents use technology to support them as parents. And so in this module, we bring the children back in, and we're looking at parent-child relationships with technology. And a few of the items that we'll be looking at are: how do parents and children use technology together? How does using technology affect the relationship and have positive influences on the outcomes of the relationship? And then how does the parents and the child's use affect the relationship, and where might there be potential conflict? So speaking of conflict, I open up with a picture of Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader, a very famous movie, parent-child pair. And if we want to think about Star Wars being a technological setting, then it fits with our theme. So just as an overview of some of the things we've talked about with parents, again, you'll notice my pyramid from the last module. We can think very, very basically of the parenting role of protecting children from harm and providing for their basic needs at a very low level. You can sort of get a feel for Maslow's hierarchy of needs, so very basic needs. The majority of what we traditionally think of as being parenting is the guide development. And with guiding development, some of the actions, as I have noted here on the left, are how parents will monitor the safety of their children, how they will manage their child's environments, how they model certain behaviors, the values, cultural norms, how they may mediate in ways that help children learn. Mediate in the sense of, say, if you and your sibling are fighting, certainly your parents' mediation in that argument will help both of you hopefully reach a peaceful conflict resolution. And while managing these roles, parents also are aiming using family processes of family communication, obviously, to strive for family cohesion and cohesion in the parent-child relationship, and are also very aware of the need for flexibility. And as I mentioned in the last module, when we think about parents, we think about how parents are, and this is covered a little bit by my picture, but how they're being supported in their own parenting by technology. That was module 6. And largely in this module, we'll be looking at how parents parent about technology, and continuing on with some things we've been talking about on decision making and monitoring their children's safety, and then how parents parent with technology. If you've taken FSOS 4155 or another parent-child relationships course, you may be aware of Paul Marine's parenting styles. And essentially a parenting style, we talk about parents being authoritarian or parents being very permissive. And where these terms come about is looking at the balance of two constructs. One of the construct is warmth and responsiveness. So how much parents are good listeners, how much they understand children, how much they are there for them and really engaged with them. And then the other concept is structure and demand. Laying down the law, being very clear about rules, having especially very high expectations for children. We know, for instance, that children generally perform better academically when they know that their parents have very high expectations for them. And so what the parenting styles looks at is the degree of both. So it isn't only being responsive. It's not just being high structure. It's that combination of both. And so, generally we would look at a parent who is very low, say, on structure or demand and very high on responsiveness as being a very permissive parent. Anything goes, whatever you want. There's no guidelines here. And in my parent-child relationships course, we'll use movie clips. And if you're familiar with the movie Willy Wonka, we use the example of Verushka Salt. Right. And her father was very permissive and, anything went. And then on the other hand, parents who could be very high in demand, have very high expectations, but show very little responsiveness and warmth to their children, we label as being authoritarian. Right. So the children, and the movie clip we use there is from Dead Poets Society, where as the father is dropping the boy off at the boys' school, we see the boy with his friends and he's joking around. But as soon as his father shows up, he changes and he becomes kind of a different person, because the father's very high in expectations and does not really listen to what the boy wants at all. And then our mixture of what we would say love, warmth, and limits, demand and structure. Our authoritative parents provide necessary guidance for their children and yet individualize their parenting to be very responsive to the unique individual child. So if you've heard about parenting styles in the past, these are the concepts that come along with it. And primarily as parenting folks, what we're really interested in is what this emotional context provides as a context for a relationship between the parents and the children. Another concept that we look at is this idea of agency and communion, and this is a little bit of a better concept, I would say, when we think about parent-child conflict. And my words are a little bit off, but here, rather than warmth and demandingness, and here, rather than just looking at the parent, we've got both players. We're looking at the parent and we're looking at the child. And our two concepts here are agency and communion. And so basically you can think of this as being out for oneself versus with regard for other people. And what we like to see in an interaction, of course, is that somebody has a certain amount of agency. They care about themselves, but they are responsive and listening to the other person. And so when there is that balance of agency and communion as expressed by both people, in a harmonious way, then generally life is good. It's when both are very high in one and very low in the other, and then there can be clash. And I have an example here. So for example, while monitoring a preteen's texting behavior, the parent may demonstrate very high agency, right? They're protecting, they're asserting their role. I am here to take care of my child. Yet, they're very low in communion. They're just ignoring how the child feels, right? I'm just going to monitor your texts, whether you care about it or not. I'm doing my job. The preteen, on the other hand, may also be very high in agency. She spends a lot of time on her phone, and she's very low in communion, and she ignores her mother's dissatisfaction for her behavior. So here you have two people, both very high in agency, saying, I want to do what I want to do, and very low in communion, and I don't care how you feel, right? I don't care how my child feels. I don't care how my mom feels. And so the result, the two are in conflict, right? So then if we come back to our concepts from earlier in the course about family processes, how do we resolve this conflict? Well, just like we did when we talked about couples, with communication. With open communication between the two, both the mother and the daughter explain their motivations. From the mother's perspective, I'm just trying to protect you. From the daughter's perspective, but I want to connect with my peers. And they listen to each other. They reach an agreement about the girl's texting, to whom, how often, and what she texts, and that she'll come to her mom if she has concerns. So now they're developing through the communication a sense of trust. This moves both toward a greater sense of communion, cohesion, feelings of connectedness, while still maintaining their sense of agency that they are asserting the role of mother and the role of the daughter. But we know, of course, in all of our parent-child relationships, it's complicated. I use the word complicated, and this actually came from a few years ago when I was teaching 4155, and we did a word cloud in the class where I asked students to share with me words that they would use to describe their relationship with their parents. And the word that was the largest, now we had words like love and caring and things like that, but a word that was just as large as love was complicated. So we know that between parents and children, as parents are trying to do the best they can, kids are growing up. And they have a lot of experiences, they have a lot of agency, they're trying to figure things out, they want to experiment. And as parents are kind of learning on the job, right, it becomes complicated. So and then we transfer this to technology, right? In promoting children's well-being with or about technology, parents do aim to facilitate positive child outcomes, right? They're just doing their job as parents. And they're mindful of maintaining the relationship with their child, right? They want to continue having a very positive relationship. However, it can ultimately be a source of conflict. And with this, I'd like you to, think about maybe in your own families, if you ran into any conflict with your parents around your use of technology, what that might have looked like, and or any younger brothers or sisters or other people you have in your lives where you've identified that just the use of technology by kids or by parents trying to parent their kids has run into conflict between the parent and the child. Okay. The various ways that it possibly can be a conflict is when parents attempt to regulate children's use, when parents express concern over potentially negative consequences of the internet, they're afraid of what might be rather than what they've actually seen. From power differentials due to expertise on technology. I mean, imagine this. There's really interesting research on this where if in a dynamic in the house, the parent has been the authoritarian, right? And maybe culturally, socially, there are the sort of rules in the family that the mother and the father are in charge, right? And yet then it comes around the use of technology, and a 7-year-old is far more comfortable using a variety of technologies than the parents are. And the parents may need to use the child to not only help them with technology, but could also be asking them to help them, say, with translation. So now you have a double source of power that parents have needed to give up and confer to the child. And that can, for some families, possibly not be terribly comfortable. Sometimes there can be conflict when parents and children use technology together. Right? My daughter is used to texting all the time, using a variety of social media. I prefer not to, and she gets frustrated that I'm not on as often as she is, or that she has to wait to connect with me. And so it could be a minor conflict. It could also be a major conflict. And as we continue on, we'll see some of those possibilities. And there possibly can be some conflict when the parent enters into the child or the teen's social space. And again, the parent may see that they're just doing their job, but this can be, it's almost like the parent dropping the kid off at school, right? And going, bye, honey, love you, and it's a source of embarrassment for the kid. Or showing up to have a conference with the principal, and it's just like, oh my gosh, what's my parent doing at school? And so that social space of the child, parents can enter in very, very easily with technology, and that too can be the parent asserting their sense of agency without tremendous source of the child's own comfort. Okay, so and yet, while we can imagine that there are potential conflicts, just as we did with thinking about conflict between couples, we also need to look at the reality. And we're going to look at some specifics around conflict and where conflict may arise more often than not, or where parents are involved more often or not. But generally, Common Sense Media did a study a couple years ago with parents and teens between 8 to 18, and the majority disagreed that getting their kids to turn off the smartphone was a struggle. The majority disagreed that they had problems with data plan charges. They disagreed that the child was less likely to communicate face to face. And the majority agreed that it was important that they monitor their children's safety. So before we get too hung up that there is going to be conflict, we have to step back and just ask the question and understand where the potential for conflict may arise as we are understanding families. But just as we found with couples, most parents and children will not express that there's a great deal of conflict. One of the, this was also from another study. This was from Parenting in the Digital Age from a study at Northwestern. And this was parents of younger children. And again, where the minority recognized that technology was a source of conflict between them and their children. So again, just sort of validating that across the board, not a real strong degree of conflict. So a couple of our considerations about involvement that may or may not contribute to conflict in terms of involvement, what involvement and engagement means to the parent, what motivates that involvement, and how might involvement move to conflict. And this should look fairly familiar because when we talked about smartphone use by kids and that decision making, this was that balance that we were talking about where parents need to make these decisions on behalf of their kids, right? But at the same time, if they back off and they're not involved at all, then they feel like they're not doing their job. So what is that delicate balance of promoting your child's development and, helping them use technology safely, and yet also feeling like you're doing your job? So some parents' own behavior is motivated by their own media habits. In this study from Northwestern, they looked at parents of young children and identified parents as being media centric, media moderate, and media light. And if you take a look at this, one of the big differences that you see is the amount of screen time that parents demonstrate, from media light parents only demonstrating, up to 2 hours per day, to media centric parents that's 10 times that, right? Percent who have a TV in their children's bedroom, 44% for media centric parents to 26% for media light. And so essentially here you can just see that that there are different behaviors by different parents, and definitely we would believe then that would affect their values and their interest in having technology around, and possibly might affect their understanding or belief that technology might be harmful to their children. If they don't see it, they're less likely to promote it with their children. We also see variations in parent involvement with technology with their children depending on the age. So we looked at this a little bit with younger children, so that we see that as children got older, even up to 6 to 8, that parents were less involved. And this is unfortunate, right? Because we talked a great deal about the importance of interacting with technology with your child. And so parents can also vary depending on the age of their young child. We also see that children's age is also going to vary parents' involvement with technology. And so here we can see that when, this is among parents whose child uses each one of these, those who talk to their child most of the time are always about the content, the exposure of what the child sees or hears. And here we see big differences by child's age. Right? So that, again, as children get older, parents are less likely to talk to them. And why would that be? Probably developmentally. As children get older, their parents are feeling that they're more responsible, their brains are developing more, they're thinking more rationally, and so they don't need to be as involved. There may also be a sense of stronger independence with teenagers, where teenagers are pushing back more, and parents are not wanting to address that conflict. But just as we saw some differences as children get older within the young child's age, we also see differences between tweens and teens. In this study, we also see differences by gender, that fathers, by and large, were less likely to be in conversation with their children than mothers would be. And why do you think that would be? Well, my guess is around socialization. Again, that as a society, we are far more likely to support mothers in the caregiving role than fathers. Mothers are maybe aware of more resources. They are more likely to stay at home with children, as men make more money than women do. All kinds of social reasons that sort of strengthen mothers' roles over fathers. And then we obviously see that as well in terms of discussions related to technology. We also see in this case that parents' own confidence about their use of technology makes a difference. The parents who are more likely to feel more confident, that are high in confident, are more likely to do these various aspects of monitoring their children's behavior versus parents who feel pretty low in these areas. So definitely parent confidence makes a difference. And again, we see that just as we did with the media-centric and the media moderate and the media light parents with the Northwestern study, Common Sense Media similarly found that parents are also, of teenagers, are also likely to spend a lot of time with screens, and that their own screen use has an influence on their screen use perceptions. And in this case is that idea that, well, I watch a lot of TV, or I'm on my computer a lot, and I am on my phone a lot, but nevertheless, I believe that I am a good media and technology model for my child. And yet, one of the other things that Common Sense Media discovered was that, what parents are doing and what they are modeling and what they are saying, we can't forget that on the other side of it is what teenagers are witnessing. And if you'll have a chance, you'll have this and you can look at it more closely. But essentially, we see very similar figures between parents and children. Parents' perception of their own behavior, parents' perception of their kids' behavior, teenagers' perception of their behavior, teenagers' perception of their parents' behavior. And that basically that, parents will say what they say, but teenagers are likely to see that parents are using technology a lot, and are they able to monitor their own behavior? And you say that I'm addicted, but look at you, right? But again, that we have to come back to, even though parents and teens are aware of each other's behavior and somewhat ignoring of their own behavior, that the perception of conflict is relatively low. In another study by Blackwell et al. in 2016, they did interviews with children and with their parents. And one of the things that these pairs of teenagers and their parents did was parents tended to underestimate how much technology their kids use. Kids report that parents only tell them what not to do, rather than to be with them constructively to help them use technology. Both parents and children admitted that they're not likely to adhere to family rules very well. And yet, parents and kids both voice that they want to share expectations, but they don't want more attention. So in essence, the sense here was that parents and kids would like to have a sort of a set of rules that they all follow and they feel comfortable with, and they can go to their separate corners and they can do their thing, and parents can feel comfortable using technology and the kids can feel comfortable using technology, and yet they don't want to have to talk about it, right? They don't want more attention to, parents monitoring kids' use and having conversations about it. And there was also something that came up here about who needs to have constant connectivity. So again, if we step back and we think about the development of a teenager and their own sense of individuation and their need for independence and their need for forming a separate identity, and with their peers and understanding sort of their own path, while there's that idea of closeness that is very valuable, kids will ask, I don't necessarily want to use this technology to be continually close with my parents. This is like, I get what they have to do, and and I understand that there are rules, but we don't necessarily need to talk about it all the time, and we don't necessarily need to be using it with each other all the time. And so I think a real key here is just that awareness that adults need to be very aware of how much technology they're using, that their teens are observing their behavior, and that if parents are not aware of their own behavior, that can be a potential source of conflict if they try to assert, again, very high agency, low communion with their kids and just set down the rules, right? So and the key, once again, we come back to is the sources of tension. Should they arise, should they arise, is for family communication and adherence to family technology rules, and when is rule violation acceptable. So establishing those rules as a family. There could possibly be a romanticized notion of family time that maybe we need to reinterpret, and we'll take a look at this with some research on device-free dinner time. And we also need to remind parents that as they are struggling with understanding monitoring and keeping their kids safe and use of screen time and things like that, is to regard kids' need for development, their need for privacy, their need for a sense of independence, while still holding them accountable. This is a quote from Dana Boyd from the On Being podcast about 5 years ago, and I think it's really lovely. I would encourage you, I have a link to it in our Canvas materials, and I would encourage you to really listen to the entire podcast. She's someone who's been on the cutting edge of technology and society for many, many years, and yet she's young. She's really a young person, and but she's very, very thoughtful and really thinks about it more from a level of individual responsibility. And she says here, you can read the whole quote. I'll just read what I have highlighted in red. When parents are navigating this, I think one of the difficulties is to recognize that this is what your values are, and they may be different from your child's values. And so how do you learn to sit and have a conversation of, here's what I want for you. What do you want? And how do we balance that? And that is the real key for parents and children. So in this module, we understand that there are, that generally parents and children, the majority of them do not perceive conflict. And yet we definitely see some variations in individual parents that could lead to some conflict based on their own screen behavior, their perceptions of what is bad or not bad, the age of the child, how much time they spend with the child interacting. So how much do they really know? How much is their perception of their children's screen use really that accurate? By their gender and by sort of how comfortable they feel in these roles, and we also understand that, from parents just kind of doing the best they can, they may be blinded to their own use that then is seen by their kids and going, yeah, well, you're just as addicted. Right? So who are you to tell me how to use it? Or who are you to tell me how to use it when you're all thumbs? So there are some of these potential sources of conflict that parents and children can work through together through communication. So again, welcome to Complicated. In promoting child well-being with technology, parents do parent with technology, and they parent about technology, and they are informed and supported by technology. And yet, as we've seen here, that relationship can very much be affected by the use of technology, by both, especially by kids and parents trying to do their job. So as parents try to regulate use, we see that varies in part by parent role, parent-child age, by parents' own level of confidence, parents' own perception of the issue, and about their own use, and in estimating their children's use may figure into their behavior. Parent balance in asserting the role and promoting the child's agency and independence still remains very uncertain for many parents. I would say the great majority of the conversations that I facilitate with parents is really about this issue. I'm trying to gain knowledge. I'm trying to do my job. I want to support my child, but all of this is still so new to me, and this is where I find that parents for each other are really wonderful sources of support and sources of help. Well, this is what we do in my family. Or, when my ex's kids came over, they had their own set of rules, and we had to have a family meeting about it because in our household, this is not what we do, right? And so parents, I believe, together can be very supportive to each other. And within the family then, of course, we're promoting strong family communication. And so in our activity for this module, we're going to be taking a look at two videos, and both of the videos are by dads, and they both are dads attempting to go online, to go into the internet in a way to assert their roles as parents, as fathers. They both have concerns related to their daughters and their daughters' use of technology that has an impact on their well-being. And so when we get together in small groups, I will ask you to have looked at the two videos, and then we'll divide up and I'll ask you to focus on one of them and give you a set of questions. But that should help to operationalize some of these items about potential conflict between parents and children, and especially about resolution through communication. So with that, I will say goodbye and thank you for listening to the presentation on Module 7. And I will be back with you for the brief presentation on Module 8 or technology use within the family. Okay, bye everyone.